Hi, I'm David Fishlock with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, and I'm pleased to be doing this educational video for Zildjian Score magazine. As we prepare the cymbal part for Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony, the first question that comes to mind is what cymbals are we going to use for this? I think 20s are the appropriate size, ideally something fairly thick and heavy with a real punchy attack. However, we do have to be able to lift them. For this demonstration, I'm going to use a pair of Zildjian 20-inch classic orchestral cymbals. For this video, I'm going to focus on the passage that is most often asked in auditions, namely 16 measures after H all the way to the end. However, I will say that for me, one of the hardest parts of this movement is the very first note. Because a lot of times after the soft third movement ends, conductors want to go attacca right into the fourth movement, and they want that very first cymbal crash to just explode out of nowhere. That can be a real challenge for cymbal players because it's very difficult to anticipate when the conductor is going to come in on his downbeat, and a lot of times we end up sort of lunging for that note. So for me to be able to play a nice relaxed first note, that's actually the hardest part of this movement. Okay, back to our excerpt. In preparing this piece for an audition, it's very similar to Romeo and Juliet in that we have only 2 or 3 opportunities to play a nice big open crash. Most of this excerpt is very fast notes or muffled notes. Those big open crashes in Tchaik 4 occur in the second and third measures of our excerpt. So as soon as we play those first 2 muffled notes, we have to get really instantly relaxed and ready to play a nice big open crash. Try to relax our arms so that those first 2 big crashes are nice and full and round. And then as soon as we finish that second big open crash, we have to immediately get down because most conductors want to play those 2 measures of offbeats as a subito piano crescendoing into fortissimo. So as soon as we play our second big crash, it's good to get right into position, get ready for that subito piano. And then at that point, I make those 2 measures of crescendo up to fortissimo, and then I just try to play all the notes fortissimo all the way until 7 measures before the end. At that point, most conductors, once again, put a subito piano crescendo all the way to the end of the piece from that point. Sometimes I've heard different players put an emphasis on beats 1 and 3 to match what the trombones are doing. Da 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 da. But I actually prefer to just play them all even and to not put any emphasis in. So we play that whole section, and then once again, 7 measures before the end, there's a subito piano. It's not printed in the music, but again, most conductors do that. And then that takes us a big crescendo all the way to the end of the piece. The last 2 crashes of the piece don't have to be as muffled as some of the earlier ones. They don't have to be muffled as quickly. I muffle those usually around beats 2 and 4. And then lastly, it's good to be prepared for an accelerando again in those last 7 measures. Sometimes we get a runaway conductor who just wants to really make a huge accelerando. I wouldn't recommend doing that in an audition, however, because I wouldn't want to give the impression of being out of control rhythmically or being completely out of energy and I have to speed it up just to get through it. So. One of the most often asked passages in the cymbal repertoire is from Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet, specifically the passage 2 measures before O to 8 measures before P. Now, obviously, we're trying to imitate a sword fight in this passage, so we have to think about what sorts of sounds we can achieve with that and what cymbals we're going to use. I like to use something real bright with a lot of attack. But we have to remember that we get to play 3 big open crashes at the end of this, so we want something that's still going to open up nicely for those. Today I'm going to use a pair of 18-inch prototypes from the Zildjian K symphonic series. Here are a few things I try to achieve when I'm playing this passage. Obviously, the main thing is to play all of these notes perfectly in rhythm and have them all be consistent in sound quality with each other. In an audition, it's important to completely muffle these notes. However, in a performance situation, we can let them, we're not going to let them ring, but if they ring a tiny little bit, that's not going to be the end of the world. The texture is so thick with the orchestra that any overtones that might occur, they're going to get drowned out by the rest of the orchestra. So that's not quite as critical in a performance situation. The last muffled crash of the actual sword fight section, I think can be a little bit heavier. There's sort of a sense of landing on that note, so we can play that a little bit heavier than the previous passage. When we get to the 3 open crashes toward the end, we want to once again relax our bodies, relax our arms, and try to have those be as open and free as possible. It's really easy to play those in a kind of a forced way after playing all these quick muffled crashes. So we want to make a real distinction in our bodies from the muffled crashes to the nice big open crashes. And lastly, I make a slight crescendo in the first 2 measures of the piece to kind of help build the excitement. Those first open crashes, I try to lead those into the actual sword fight section. So let me play this passage for you now. The Dance of the Mirlitons from Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Ballet has a wonderful little cymbal part in it. For this passage, I like to use a smaller, heavier pair of cymbals, one that gets a real nice attack sound but without a lot of spread to it. For this recording, I'm going to use an old pair of Constantinople cymbals, and you'll notice that my left-hand cymbal is a 14-inch, my right-hand cymbal is a 15-inch. These cymbals just seem to pair up real nicely together, and it doesn't pose any big problem with the fact that they're not the same size. When we listen to the orchestra part for this movement, the first thing that we notice is that the cymbals play an interlocking rhythm with the trombones and then later the strings. When I perform this, I try to not listen to that very much, because if I do, I'm going to tend to be late. So I try to just hunker down on my part and keep it moving forward. And this is especially important in an audition situation. We want this movement to have a lot of forward momentum without sounding rushed. I do, however, think that it's nice to dynamically taper off on the last few notes of the passage. As we hear the trombones and the strings play this, we can also hear that they play little hairpins throughout their melody. And I've sometimes messed with trying to match that in the cymbals, but I ultimately think it's best to just play this dynamically straight, to just try to make all our notes consistent, even though the trombones are moving up and down dynamically. Now, like many soft cymbal excerpts, this one can be performed a little bit louder in a performance situation than in an audition. In an audition, of course, we're trying to show the committee how softly and consistently we can play cymbals. But in a performance, it's really more appropriate to play this closer to mezzo piano. Oftentimes when I play soft crashes, I use a little bit of sizzle, which is when we let the cymbals stay together for a brief moment to soften the attack. In this excerpt, however, I try to go more for a ching sound. I let the cymbals just naturally rebound off each other, and I don't let them stay together for long at all. That also makes the 8th notes, which we play first, and the 16th notes, which we play second, it makes them consistent in length. And lastly, I've heard recordings where the player lets the last cymbal note ring over quite a while, but I like to muffle that to allow the flutes to transition back into the opening melody. So I'm going to play this for you now.